Hi everyone, thank you for coming here to my session at Unreal Fest. It's great to be here. I hope everyone's having a blast and learning a lot. I am for sure. My name is Konrad Białowąs and I'm a senior environment artist at Bloober Team. And I'm here just to talk a little bit about the environment art of the Otherworld from the game Silent Hill 2. This session will be mostly art-based, where I'll be presenting some workflows that we introduced in the production of those environments. We'll be talking a little bit about environmental storytelling, which is a massive part of Silent Hill. And at the end, I've added a little bit of technical aspects of optimization and some of the problems we encountered during the production of the game. I'll be mostly talking about it from the perspective of an environment artist and how we kind of cooperated together on those topics. Cool. So before we get started, just a few words about myself. I decided to put my photo there for some reason, but you can see me here. So I've been working in the industry as an environment artist for around 7 years. And before that, I worked in live television, but also working within Unreal. Here are some of my contact details that you can reach me on in case I miss anything or you have any kind of questions that might have arisen after the presentation. Please feel free to contact me and I'll do my best to answer those questions. So just a quick rundown of what we'll be talking about today. When I was doing the presentation, I realized that some of you may not know what Silent Hill is about, and I think like a basic understanding of what the game kind of is about is important to understand what the Otherworld is. So could I get a show of hands who played the original Silent Hill 2? Okay, nice. And who played the remake? Okay, great. Great, that's very optimistic. So firstly, we will deep dive into the rules of the Otherworld, so the kind of basic visual pillars that we have used as a guide in the process of production. Then I'll present through workflows. Making the environment character section will be the environmental storytelling aspect of the game, because as those who have played it, and I see a lot of you played it, know how big that role plays in Silent Hill, symbolism and all of that. And at the end, as I said, problems, optimizations, and takeaway, and a short Q&A session where you can ask any questions that you might have. So I'll just explain to those who have not played it what Silent Hill 2 is about. The original was released in 2001, and since then has been recognized as a cult classic of the psychological horror genre. Silent Hill 2 follows the story of James Sunderland, who travels down to the town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his deceased wife, Mary. There he discovers that there is something wrong with the town. He encounters disturbing monsters and mysterious characters, including Maria, a woman who eerily resembles Mary, his wife. As James delves deeper, he uncovers repressed memories and guilt surrounding Mary's death. The town reflects his inner torment, forcing him to confront the truth. The game explores themes of grief, guilt, and psychological trauma. And when we started work and word came out that we are working on Silent Hill 2, not many people were optimistic. And I think just looking by all the kind of fan feedback of old fans and new fans and seeing how much you folks enjoyed the game made us very happy, because everyone at Bloober Team is a big fan of Silent Hill, and that game had a lot of kind of influence on us as game developers. So with all this kind of foundation out of the way, we can get into the topic of today's presentation. If you're not familiar with Silent Hill, you might not know what the Otherworld is. It is portrayed differently in different series of Silent Hill, but in Silent Hill 2, the Otherworld is a hellish, rusted, and decayed version of the real town of Silent Hill, often called the Fog World. It is not just a creepy aesthetic, but it is very much a psychological space. It reflects James's internal state and emotions, often in ways that are subtle, but sometimes they are brutally literal. we've had to think of it not just a visual layer, but as an emotional and a narrative one. So here's a small visual explanation of the Otherworld to help you understand how the world changes and progresses throughout the game. The walls start peeling away from the main structure through gradual exposing of the metal, wires, and rust, which are so definitive of the Silent Hill visual aesthetic. The lighting becomes darker and much more contrasted, and we start seeing these unexplainable voids in the floors and the ceiling that seemingly end nowhere. So as I was creating this presentation, I felt that we can split all of the aesthetic of the Otherworld into three main rules or visual pillars that work in tandem to boost the narrative of the game. Those three are cloth, layered decay, and rusted metal. Each plays a different role in the storytelling value of the game. The cloth fabric gives us these creepy silhouettes and shrouds the entire level in mystery. The decay makes everything sick and fragile, and this references the progressively worsening health of our main character's wife, Mary. And the rusted metal, it grounds everything in a harsh and tactile reality. Together, they create a layered visual language that reflects the mental unraveling of the characters. We'll deep dive into the first pillar, which is the cloth, and we'll go into some kind of examples and breakdowns of how we created this asset and what I feel make our approach unique. So Silent Hill 2 consists of so many different kind of cloths and fabrics that come in so many different shapes and sizes. And here we have an example from Blue Creek Apartments, where the cloth is, in this case, super tightly bound to the environment. It feels man-made. It doesn't feel natural. On the other hand, we had the use of fabric in order to create striking compositions that will guide the player and catch their attention in important parts of the level. In this example, we are in Brookhaven Hospital in the electric bed puzzle, and this was kind of the main piece of the level, and we wanted this to feel like almost like a cinematic shot. So I really liked this one. And then we go on to sort of cloth that is just absolutely plastering the whole level, that you can barely see what's underneath the fabric. And this, I think, was one of the most effective tools we had as environment artists to create this horror feeling. Because in darkness, you barely can see what the shape makes out of the cloth. You don't know if it's an enemy, if it's another character. So the horror value really gets spiked, and the player's imagination gets very stimulated here. So what I feel makes our approach to creating this sort of fabric and cloth assets is that we created and simulated everything with the environment in mind. Firstly, we tried creating some sort of, generic kits or modular sort of kit bashing sets. And of course, that's had some mileage to it. But for the massive role these elements, they play visually and narratively in the game, we had to get something more effective. Because if we didn't think of creating the clothes with the environment in mind, everything looked disconnected. So in this case, we leaned into simulation tools, fabric simulation tools, such as Marvel's Designer. So the main workflow for this was creation of a base environment, which was just our kind of silhouette for the simulation. So we would kind of drop in all the kind of basic geometries, such as the walls and the floors, chairs, etc. Then we would export that as a level, or as a chunk of a level, and put it in, for example, Marvel's Designer or any kind of simulation software that the artist preferred. This gave us, this really striking sort of compositions and silhouettes that were so important to us. And most of all, they were not repetitive. It was very unique. We then kind of did an extra detail pass in ZBrush or any kind of software you like, and did a small optimization by decimating it. And lastly, everything was textured in Substance Painter with, a complete baked texture set that once again drove the visual fidelity to a very nice level. And we used Nanite a lot throughout the game. We really enjoyed Nanite, and the reason for that is, it firstly makes stuff look pretty, which we like as artists. Tech artists don't like that as much when they had to optimize. But in a game where 80% of the time you're walking around with a flashlight and the cone of light is very limited, when you have janky, optimized, not smooth sort of silhouettes, you instantly see that. And we felt that it removes the player from the world they're in. So, when we had this opportunity to sort of use this more geometry, we jumped right at it because it created really nice lighting and casted super nice shadows. So here's a little bit of an anecdote regarding this workflow, because it's a pretty much a traditional workflow, except for the fact that we export bits of the level and work around them to create our compositions. But at the start, thanks to my lead Fabian, who sent me these images from his garage where he wrapped up a wheelchair in some cloth and some duct tape and created some scans of it to see, what kind of effect we can get. He created some pillars, etc., etc. And, the scans give fantastic results. They're super high fidelity, but for a smaller team like ours, it was not really time and cost effective to scan all of the stuff that we need. So we had to go back into this more traditional workflow in order to, make all of the stuff that we want and not only rely on this. But this work was not wasted because this gave us a fantastic benchmark that we have, right in the engine, that we can always look back and get as a quality sort of something that we want to achieve using their traditional workflow. And this was super helpful. So now we go into the second pillar, which is the crafting the tangible layers of decay. So what I mean by tangible is we wanted the player to almost feel like, they can smell the room they're in. They can reach out and touch all of this rust, this corruption and decay. And, Nanite helped here massively, as I will explain a bit later, because with all this extra geometry, with all this extra layering we could achieve, the player could spend a couple seconds standing in place and just observing the environment around them, because there was so much kind of layers we've added to it. So I'll start with sort of a basic workflow, how we achieve these holes, this corruption. And one of the most important aspects for us is we wanted to use the same geometry that we used in the real town of Silent Hill, or the so-called fog world. And this is because the levels, for those who may not have played the game, the levels replicate themselves, but just in different realities. So you have, for example, Brookhaven Hospital fog world, and then you have the Otherworld. So we started out with basic modular geometry, like flooring, walls, ceilings, etc. And these were just directly copied over from the fog world. So it proved as a good foundation to start out with, just with some very simple material tweaks and changes. Secondly, we used a vertex blending material with an alpha layer to burn through these rusted holes in the floor. This might not have been the most optimized way to do this, because with Nanite, you probably don't want to use Nanite to its full capacity. You probably don't want to use the alpha. But these kind of elements we're not using Nanite anyway, because we couldn't vertex paint on Nanite at the time of the production. And it was great for artists because we had a lot of flexibility when creating, these amazing compositions and golden paths that the player could follow. As the final layer, we added some high polygon, high density rust flakes that of course had Nanite enabled, that really pushed the tactile feeling of the rusted and decayed holes. In this example, the composition we were creating, it is right next to a puzzle where the player would spend a lot of time. They would spend time looking at their environment. So we put the extra effort to polish this area. In other lower importance areas where the visual fidelity can be sacrificed for optimization, we would refrain from using these dressing assets and instead either use nothing at all or just use decal actors, which from a distance would look exactly the same. And you can see here the final effect, which kind of underlines what I'm keep repeating about the layering, because you can clearly see each layer slowly peeling away. So what did we achieve with this? Firstly, the modular workflow was retained. And this is fantastic when you can have the flexibility to always go back, change the room a little bit, change the path. Because in a game like Silent Hill, you spend a lot of time in the same place, in one building, a lot of corridors. So we often kind of tweaked the path, tweaked the rooms. And if we had to create a new geometry every time we wanted to change something, we would be making the game to this day without, ever releasing. This saved us countless of hours, of course. And once again, we had a lot of flexibility as artists for changes and improvements. The third element of the Otherworld is the rusted metal. And the rusted metal is the foundation of the Otherworld. It is the main material used in those levels and comes in several shapes, sizes, and colors. The key to this was identifying what qualities make rusted metal feel like the word I highlighted in this presentation, organic. It seems like a simple thing to do, but it was quite difficult to master. So here are just some quick references to give you an idea of what we are going for with our metal. Rusted ship holes like this one were a great resource for this kind of material. As you can see, there's very clear layering and displacement. I'll also present just a quick small workflow that we developed over the course of production in order to quickly apply this aesthetic to our assets. So I'm a strong believer in using all of the tools that the engine gives us to our advantage. And the modeling toolkit has increased our productivity quite a lot by saving us time, not going in and out of the engine, and whenever we just want to, quickly improve something or test things out. So as an example, we see just basic floor grate that we have used in a lot of places throughout the Otherworld levels. And if you compare it to the images I've shown in the previous slide, it is, quite simple, quite boring. The silhouette is not very defined. And in order to make this world believable, we had to replicate the visuals we saw in the references. So we can quickly achieve this sort of effect by using the displacement modifiers in the modeling toolkit. It's not a massive change, but you can see how much the kind of lighting reacts to this asset differently now. We start seeing, some nice different kind of lighting reflections, and it starts looking a little bit more like the references that we see previously. Of course, with this, there comes more triangles because the displacement modifier just kind of adds a little bit more division so we can displace things. But the other fantastic tool that you have in the modeling toolkit is Simplify, which works a lot like the decimation master in ZBrush. And you can use this on photo scans, it works perfectly on that, or just asset that you have used with the displacement feature. And here's just a quick handy tip that if you're doing anything in the modeling toolkit using the sort of simplify toolkit or the displacement, and it goes crazy and messes up your normals, the normals function 80% of the time can help you get back to where it's supposed to be looking without going to Maya and go back in. And here's the same kind of workflow, but in a different setting. This was the prison basement section where we used this sort of displacement workflow to drive the geometry of the brick walls. Because at the time of the production, the sort of displacement on the material was not in the engine. And in this area, it was super important to us to have this sort of bulky, sort of displaced feeling, because it actually felt like some sort of dingy basement and not just some simple geometry around you. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, you know, it's a fantastic toolkit, and if you can incorporate it into your workflow, I think you really should. Because what opened my eyes to this is our leads directed me to this series on YouTube called 90 Days in Unreal, where there's some really creative use cases of stuff like the destruction to create rubble elements and, you know, some nice displacement techniques. And, you know, even if you don't use the assets in your final production, it's a fantastic way to create some look dev scenes or assets that if you're doing, you know, in Maya and Blender and importing back in, it will take a lot longer because you have the visual kind of result right there in front of you without the need of doing anything in third-party programs. So now going into the environmental storytelling part of the presentation, we wanted to make the town of Silent Hill feel like it's a living entity or a character. We wanted to make it feel like the town is watching you. So we treat it exactly like a character. It reacts to things, it influences, and it guides you. And every kind of design decision was made with that intent. Through our environmental work, we push a lot of narrative storytelling because that's the basis of Silent Hill. This in turn gave the effect that the world is just another character in our adventure. Here I will go over a few examples where we meshed the levels to influence the decisions and the choices that the player makes. Here in the Brookhaven Hospital, we see a very dark corridor with some contrasting light, and we use the decay of the flooring and the reflections from the single source of lights to highlight this rotten golden path, which will guide the player to the next destination. And here we don't actually show the player what's there, that they're supposed to go there. We make them feel that they want to go there and explore, because, you know, that's another kind of idea with Silent Hill. Not everything is shown straight away. You know, the player has to make an effort and go and explore. And, you know, that's what made this game so fun to work on, because you can just go crazy on this kind of stuff. There you go. So we tried as much as possible not to use artificial looking ways of pointing the player in the direction they're supposed to go. So you have the famous, you know, yellow paint or whatever it's called nowadays. So in turn, we relied on composition techniques. In this example, we are using, you know, the material that makes up the level, which is the cloth, and create this, you know, striking composition that blends in with the general aesthetic of the level. And, you know, at the first sight, it might not look like, you know, it's not striking you in the eyes saying, come here, do this. But if the player, you know, spends a little time looking at the things around them, they will appreciate, you know, this kind of sort of compositions. So we worked closely with level designers to, once again, use the environment as a silent guide. The composition, the lighting, the visual language, it all leads the player without breaking immersion. The environment constantly says, look here or go this way without needing a waypoint marker. And for a horror game, I think it's extremely important to have the player, feel like they're glued to their screen and not feel like they're actually, playing a game, but they are experiencing a different reality. So, yeah. And here's just another quick example of some of the kind of shots which I feel present this sort of concept very well. We work closely on making the environment a series of cinematic shots, or postcards, as we like to call them, that you could put a cine camera in Unreal at any kind of points in the environment, take a picture, and it would look like something from a movie. And I think that's what made a lot of these environments work. And by sticking to our visual guidelines and composition rules consistently, we allow the player and the environment to create a mutual language that will guide them across the level without the need for previously mentioned artificial guidelines. Because the player will pick up cues that we as artists presented to them. And this kind of language, it starts bonding a little bit more and more throughout the whole of the game. So it's important to stick to those rules once you're going through them. And of course, the visuals of the Otherworld could have changed. They changed dramatically from the original Silent Hill 2 from 2001 to the one we've remaked. Because in the original Silent Hill 2, you barely had this rust aesthetic that came in later parts of Silent Hill, but we reintroduced this. So here we have just an example. We have the lobotomy puzzle from the hospital, where instead of rust, we use trash and debris, but the visual rules and consistency stayed the same. We used it to frame the main point of interest in the scene and make it look as organic as possible. So here is the sum of the problems and optimizations that we took. So just a disclaimer, I'm not a tech artist. I will talk about it from the perspective of an environment artist, because at Bloober, we had a shared responsibility from the tech artists and environment artists that we will optimize our levels as artists as we will go along. And I'll explain a little bit how we got there. So we achieved this very high visual fidelity using varied mesh actors. However, this in turn caused us to have several and a lot of actors on the level, and in turn performance issues. The Otherworld used a lot of large objects to create a feeling of void, and this caused performance with the shadow casting actors. Our tech department created a variety of useful tools to combat these issues, and I'll talk about one of them today. So here we have, whoa, that is blurry. Okay. So we have the instant static mesh packing tool created by our amazing and tech artist, Sebastian Włoszek, who saved us a countless of times, and everything would have exploded without him. So big kudos to him, because he's a super talented guy. It is a single interface that was prepared for the artist that allows us to quickly select areas of actors to be optimized. It gives quick insights into what we are optimizing and what effect our optimization will have. And the best thing for artists is that it's packed into a single interface. So if you're powering through levels, optimizing stuff, you have everything in a single tool that will cover all your tasks that are required. And I think this is a nice way of doing things, because we as artists, we like to make things pretty, we like to make levels and art, but optimization is an important aspect that is sometimes ignored by artists. So I'll go over a quick breakdown of how the tool is used and what steps are taken to create a very basic optimization path. So we select two assets which will work as a sort of a bounding box for our capture box. We can of course adjust the capture area with the handles provided in the tool. And this sort of way of capturing the actors work really nicely because Silent Hill is a game with hundreds of corridors. So you can drop this box in there, select the size and the bit of the corridor that you want to optimize, and you're all done. It probably might have worked differently for open world games, but this sort of workflow worked great for us. There we go. So the tool allows us to create presets depending on what kind of assets we're working for. In this example, I was working on the floor of the Brookhaven Hospital, and this flooring had a lot of these small kind of rust debris sets that I have mentioned earlier. So I've created a rust flakes preset that will only capture these assets because I don't want to kind of accidentally capture anything else, because I'm focusing just on that bit over there. And the artists can create their own presets that will be kept in their tool. After we have captured and selected our desired meshes, we have a quick insight into the details of the static mesh actors and what effect the optimization will have. So as you can see here, we have the selected actors. The tool tells us what actors are mirrored, what actors are painted, and the draw calls before and after the optimization. And what was especially useful is the painted actors for us as artists, because when we are often painting using vertex blends or anything like that, you might, paint 3 pixels of a mesh and forget about it, But this mesh could have been packed and instanced, but the moment that it's painted or mirrored, that's no longer possible. So this was a great tool to kind of mitigate those issues. And at the end, it converts it into a very handy instant static mesh actor that is sort of like a container. And the great thing for it was that it could easily be opened and new stuff could be added or taken out depending on, for example, if we had to remesh a part of the level, we didn't lose our optimization. We could just add and edit and tweak it to suit our needs. So what made this tool successful? And I think it's the most important aspect of this was the communication between our departments. Because TechArt gave a series of guidelines to us that we have to complete on the level. And in turn, we told them, okay, so how does this work? What does this do? And them spending that little bit of time explaining the sort of TechArt aspects and optimization stuff to us made all the difference, because we could work together on creating this tool and making it easier for, for artists who are more, visual-minded to use. So, and, whenever we had any feedback, it wasn't ignored, but it was implemented in a way that we can successfully, optimize the game and take a little bit of load off the tech art, because the tech art departments often are quite small, so we have to help as much as we can. Special thanks to Fabian, Andreas, Alexandra, and Valerio and Sebastian for contributing their fantastic work to this presentation. I wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. So thank you very much for coming over to my session.